Folks, thanks for joining us again today. Tons of news. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about everything from the Nobel Prize to where gold is going and to an amazing development that hasn't taken place in 400 years. So stay tuned to all of that. And thanks again to each of you who's joining us for the first time, seeing our numbers continue to go up at Stockwell Day News day to day. A little disappointed yesterday when we saw that the X or Twitter folks would not, in fact, allow a posting. They usually do when I send something over there to tell people to check out Spotify, and they wouldn't allow yesterday's because of the issues revolving around Israel. So very interesting there. Spotify published my news, as did YouTube and other places, but X got a little bit offended. So if you know Elon, give him a call for me and we'll have a chat about that. But isn't it amazing that Israel, this tiny little country, let's just step back and take the view from, as we say, 30,000 feet. Tiny little country. When you look at it on the map, it takes up 0.05% of the land mass of countries which surround it, all Muslim nations which surround it. So it's less than 1% of the landmass. Population-wise, depending on any given day, let's say 8 million people maybe, in a sea of almost 300 million people that surround it, again, from all the Muslim nations. And yet this tiny little sliver of land has a GDP that rivals, maybe other than Saudi Arabia, that rivals most of the nations around it. It is stunning in terms of what it's done over the last decades on the business front. It's known as and being called the startup nation of the world. Used to be a socialist state right after 1948 when it was recognized by the UN after 2,000 years. And just stunning things that happen related to Israel. The whole world just keeps watching. And now, of course, people say that what goes on in the Middle East, they've said for years, could be bringing us to the brink of the Third World War. And now we have peace breaking out. Now we have Muslim nations actually supporting Israel in its quest for peace and wanting Hamas to, here you have the Arab Muslim nations telling Hamas, you have to disband, you've got to step down, you've wrecked the place. It's absolutely stunning. And so it's just a note here, it's no surprise that people who believe there is truth in the Bible, or in fact who believe that the Bible is the source of truth, and I happen to believe that, though I also believe everybody can have different points of view, and we need the freedom of speech and democracy that goes with that. But those who keep, whether Christians or Jews, those who keep pointing to the Bible as having talked about so many things that are going on in this tiny little sliver of land. There are other disputes. There are raging disputes between countries in other parts of the world. There are even disputes where more people are being killed, massacred, than you've seen in the Middle East. But the whole world continues to watch the Middle East. So interesting reflections there as people continue to look to the Bible as a source of, at the very least, historical truth, if not spiritual truth, in terms of pointing at where Israel came from and where it's going. So just a little bit of a reflection on that today. Going along with that, have you heard, you probably haven't, up until today, of a woman by the name of Corina Machado. You heard of her before? No? Well, neither had I, but she won the Nobel Prize for Peace. Now, I'm not taking anything away from this woman. I understand as an opposition leader in Venezuela, which is a ridiculously far-left country that is destroying its economy, impoverishing its systems, its citizens, and of course mainstream media does not like to talk about the fact that Venezuela's main problem is not its autocratic leader, though that's a big one, but it's the way it runs the economy as a socialist country, and it's been on the pathway to ongoing economic destruction. And this woman has been speaking up against the excesses of that particular Venezuelan government, and I say good for her. And apparently she's done it so much, though many of us hadn't heard of her, that she's won the Nobel Prize. Now, of course, that's got many people upset. Many people have felt, and with good reason, that it should have been Donald Trump, and at the very least, Donald Trump, along with the Muslim leaders who supported him on pulling together the peace deal in Gaza, and of course his previous work with the Abraham Accords, bringing peace to the Middle East. So a lot of people upset today. I'm going to make a little prediction here. This is intensely political, the Nobel Prize every year, of course, and people are sort of scorning the fact that it didn't go to Trump when it was awarded to President Obama years ago. He had just barely been elected president, hadn't done anything, but caught up in the euphoria of a left-leaning leader being elected as president of the United States. Now, listen, a lot of us were very excited about President Barack Obama being elected. I know I was, for sure. It was the great sign of the great divide in the United States was going to be pulled together. As of course it turned out, that didn't happen in his second term. Barack Obama let many people down in terms of taking a fairly woke and a kind of incendiary view related to the race riots, etc. All that aside, we have the fact that President Trump did not get the Nobel Prize. Here's my prediction. They say the reason for this is what the Nobel Committee says, is applications have to be in by January 31st of any particular year for the prize to be awarded in that year. I'm going to predict, and hold me to account if I'm wrong on this, that he will get the prize next year, that the Nobel folks are saying, well, you know, the Gaza deal didn't happen till well after January 31, and so he shouldn't have got it this year because it didn't meet the guidelines for the timeline when it has to be entered. So I'm saying watch for it next year, and maybe what the Nobel Prize Committee will do is include some other names on there. And that might be even worth consideration. A pretty big step for Muslim leaders to be supporting Trump and supporting Israel vis-a-vis what happened in Gaza, and telling Hamas to basically go away, put down their weapons, go away. So watch for that, see if that comes true. Don't know if it will. Just before we leave the topic, look at some economic issues here on the Nobel folks. You know, they give prizes in a variety of categories every year. So the prize for literature went this year, I was very happy to hear about this, to a Hungarian writer. Now, I'm not even going to try to get the last name right, but first name is Lazio, I believe is how it's spelled. Now, here's why I'm happy about that. I have an ongoing dispute. Used to have it with my mother till she passed away, and she was an English teacher fanatic. And then one of my sisters picked up that torch and became the English fanatic of the family. And of course, she is an English teacher in a school. And they would always be down on me, my mother and my sister, when I would write certain things and use a run-on sentence. My sentences would go on too long. Many people say that about politicians generally, but there's a thing called the run-on sentence, which is generally frowned on in literature, and I always used to push back on my mother and my sister in them giving me a hard time because sentences of mine would go a little long. I feel great that this guy got the award because he's also, other than the book, which I haven't looked at, I can't even tell you politically where he's coming from, but he gets the award for run-on sentences. He has a run-on sentence in his book that goes on for 400 pages. Yes, that's right, 400 pages. I will never again feel badly about a run-on sentence. Thank you, Lazio, for coming through. Canada has the answer for many of the problems that certainly the left talk about, certainly when it comes to climate change. With the amazing development of Canadian energy products, and thinking mainly of liquid natural gas here, but the way oil is refined at better rates in Canada than anywhere else in the world. So Canada's LNG, as we have talked about before, can be and is proving to be a major factor in global emissions being reduced, not increased. And people say, well, that's counterintuitive. Well, no, it's not, because if you take LNG and put that in a country where they've been using primarily coal, for instance, as China does, or massive, massive energy plants based on cow dung, which of course I don't even have to start getting into the downside effects of that. And also the fact that Canadian LNG could be getting Europe off of their dependence on Russian oil, the stranglehold, we've talked about this before, that Putin has on European countries because they have to buy his oil, and in doing that, they finance his attacks on Ukraine. For all these reasons, and then on a national basis, the development of pipelines and liquid natural gas in Canada, not only is it lowering emissions globally, but provides huge opportunity for employment, for scientific development, because anytime you have massive investment, there are breakthrough scientific developments that happen, and provides wonderful opportunities for the First Nations community throughout the country, especially in Western Canada. And now we have the Prime Minister of Canada saying there's no way they're going to get approval, even though he's talked about wanting to quickly approve major projects that are beneficial economically and environmentally. And this certainly is the case with what Alberta's proposing. But the Prime Minister is saying it's not going to happen if you don't get approval from British Columbia, the neighboring province on the Pacific Ocean, for those outside of Canada might not be familiar with the geography, and saying that you have to get approval there and you have to get First Nations approval. Now, what is not being defined, what the Prime Minister is not being defined, is the many, many First Nations groups, scores of them, that approve of pipeline activity because they genuinely see it as, first of all, the end game there is a reduction in global emission and huge generational opportunities for especially their young people in the areas of the trades and in the area of scientific development. Many, many First Nations being very positive about possible pipeline development. But when you listen to mainstream Canadian media, you'd think all First Nations are opposed to it. They are not. And it's high time that mainstream media, who affect the minds of liberals, they should be honest enough to report there's huge support among First Nations communities for one particular pipeline project being proposed by Premier Daniel Smith and the province of Alberta. So it's time, I think, we had a little more focus on First Nations support and the fact that they become 51% owners of virtually any economic deal that they get into. So let's see where that goes. On the question of elections, interesting, and Kamala Harris's new book, I think they call it 107 Days, talking about her short run for president, she makes a stunning admission here. And she says that the Democrat Party, and all left-leaning parties should be listening to this, like the Liberal Party in Canada, one of the biggest factor that resulted in a win for the Republicans and a loss for the Democrats was the Democrats' stubborn refusal to change their policy related to gender, and specifically on items like participation in sports by athletes who were born men and competing against women. This has been a major issue, and the whole issue of the sanctity of women's spaces, for instance, in sports, we're talking about in their shower rooms and changing areas, and also women's spaces in certain facilities, incarceration facilities, women's shelters. And the Democrats refused to back off on this. They refused to take a stand that would limit this. Republicans went the other side. They said there should be no competition against women from people who were born as men. Anyway, she admits that was a key election issue, probably lost the election, and she even says that they, as Democrats, should have considered what people were saying about the unfair advantage against women when you allow men who were born or you allow participants who were born as men to compete against women. It's not an issue of discrimination. Adults can make the choices that they want in terms of what they want to do with their bodies. But she's saying, and media is just starting to report, she's saying they made a mistake. They should have been listening to people on that particular issue. Carry that over to what just happened in the province of British Columbia in their provincial legislature. There was a motion that came forward, there's legislation that came forward that would follow what's been happening in a number of other countries like the United Kingdom in terms of banning doctors from prescribing things like puberty blockers to minors, to kids, and saying that should wait until they're adults, which is kind of counterintuitive because, of course, once you're an adult, you're beyond the puberty stage. But this legislation and this type of approach has been looked at and approved of in other countries. But when it came to a vote in the legislature in British Columbia, and the vote was to not allow doctors to apply and give puberty blockers to kids because this is life-altering and life-changing stuff. It would also, the legislation would also have allowed parents to sue or individuals to sue beyond the statute of limitations if, in fact, they went through gender transition, especially on the surgical side, not just the chemical side, and then years later, they found it to be destructive. As we're hearing and seeing many people coming forward, famously, giving testimony to the fact that they really regret having gone through their transition, how it destroyed their lives, how they never got their health back, and lawsuits are coming forward. So this bill would have also extended the statutes of limitations because sometimes it takes a number of years before you realize if you've had your system surgically changed by radical surgery and radical chemical intervention. Sometimes takes a few years for that to manifest. So the ability for people to sue was also in this bill, and the Socialist Party, the New Democrat Party, also voted against that. So I'd say keep an eye on that, and conservative-leaning parties should remember this is an election issue, and the majority of people favor the position of limiting what happens to gender transition, surgically or chemically, on kids. Keep that in mind. This could hurt the socialists in British Columbia. We'll see where it goes. I said yesterday that it's been interesting to watch, and I had predicted some months ago the price of gold to continue going up, and it broke the 4,000 mark in terms of $4,000, its value per troy ounce. And now we see it dropping a little. So just keep in mind that no upward run in markets lasts forever. I don't think this is going to mean that gold is going to really plummet, but we see a strengthening of the dollar as improving signs in the U.S. economy. So again, anytime the dollar looks stronger and things look better, you're going to see somewhat of the gold dropping a little bit as confidence comes back in the dollar. But I would say be careful about that. China has just imposed new tariffs on U.S. shipping in and out of China. That's going to raise the cost of goods. That's going to make people nervous. So don't think that gold is going to plummet. Watch for its sort of maintaining its high range. If the economy stays strong, of course, then people will move back to the dollar. Looking at some of the culture news of the day, for those of you country fans, more and more people who aren't even country fans are watching what's been going on there, because country music generally as a genre seems to be picking up in terms of popularity, and I'll leave it up to the cultural analysts to decide why. But Zach Bryan has his song called Bad News takes some shots at the U.S. administration and at Trump's stand vis-a-vis illegal immigration. And now Zach Bryan is running into a lot of hot water from other people in the industry for taking this particular stand. They're saying this could be his Bud Light moment, in which people say he goes too far. Lee Green, another famous artist, of course, in the U.S. seems to be, or Lee Greenwood seems to be leading the attack on that. So, boy, these culture wars continue, and people need to be careful in terms of taking their shots. I want to point to something fascinating today, and it comes from the city or the country of Chile. Now, Chile, as you may or may not know, has what's called the highest altitude desert in the world, going up to 8 to 10,000 feet, complete desert. To give you an idea how much of a desert that area is, they went 400 years without a drop of rain, all the way from about the 1570s all the way to 1971. Before that area, 400 years without a drop of rain. And the last few years, there's been moisture returning, and this is a very positive development in that area, so much so that there's a beautiful flower that's been blooming now in this high altitude desert, the Atacama Desert in Chile. An area that hadn't had a drop of rain for 400 years is starting to bloom. Kind of underlines the fact that when you hear the word climate and changing, climate has always been changing, and it is not necessarily negative. Folks, even in the desert, things can bloom. Keep that thought in mind as you go through the day. Thanks for tuning in today.